Well, good morning. If you are new with us today, let me just share with you, we are a 131-year-old church who's entering into a new season and a new day. And so if you'd like to know more about that, or if you'd like to follow along with the message today, at the edge of the pews here, you should see an impact guide, and you can find sermon notes, a weekly devotional, and other things right there. I also want to say, if you have a Facebook-enabled device, would you share the live stream that's going on right now? Tag someone in that, because, hey, Easter is in 2 weeks, but next week we're having a really big party with free barbecue and all sorts of stuff. So you want to tag them, invite them, and if you're one who watches online, we want to see you here next week for free shirts, free barbecue, all that good stuff. So we have been in a 6-week series that concludes next week that is our first step into the Uncharted. Our journey has led us to a point where we are revitalizing as a church, and you can see some of the new things that are happening and going on. But as we've gone through the weeks, we've been coming to different decision points each week. And this week's decision point is simple. We are going to put everything on the table and hold nothing back from God. Now, I always start out with a story or an illustration. They're not usually quite so on the nose as this one. But a couple years ago, in Alameda, California, another church was doing a campaign very similar to what we're doing. And just like us, they were asking people to go into a spiritual journey. It's not about the finances first, it's about that spiritual journey, and to pray through what God would have them do and how He would unlimit Himself in their lives. And the pastor had this couple come forward, and the gentleman was a lawyer, and his wife was there, very analytical thinker. And he started this process of saying, I've been challenged by this campaign. I've been challenged by what it would look like to give sacrificially. And then he even said, there's just this one statement that keeps sticking out in my brain. It's that whole not equal giving, but equal sacrifice. And I don't know what sacrifice looks like for me. And so he said, as he's sharing, he says, so one day I was praying and I was just asking God, what does that look like? And I got this wild idea. Now, I don't know if you know too many lawyers, but if a lawyer gets a wild idea, there's something that's about to happen in the house there. And so he goes, the church has been saying that, everything belongs to God and I'm just a steward of it. So what if we got everything together and stuck it on our dining room table? And, his wife's not in the room. She's not seeing what's going on. And so he's going around and he's getting, the deed to his house. He's getting cars, the notes to the cars. He's getting his vacation plans, the checking account, just all of these different things that represent their hobbies and their furniture. And he sets it out onto the table. And then he goes and gets his wife. Can you imagine walking into your kitchen and seeing all of your important things on the kitchen table and you have no context for what is going on in that moment? You're just going, dear, I trust you. Please don't start a bonfire. I don't know what you're doing here. And so he grabbed and he said the final thing, he stuck his wallet on, and then he grabbed his wife's hand and he laid it on top of that and he said, dear, all of this belongs to God. And she was looking at him, waiting for something, but it was like it was a novel idea. It was something he'd never thought of before. And he goes, and I think we should pray, what does God want to do with this? And so she began to pray, they began to pray, and he said, as he stood up in front of the congregation in that moment, he goes, you know what, I got to tell you, I went into this campaign with some numbers in my head. Maybe this is what we'll do. Just like we've said, it's including all the giving we've done in the past or what we regularly give. But he said, as I laid that on the table, I started to feel God come alive and challenge me. And I started to realize what sacrifice would actually look like. And then he shared with the congregation that at that time, God had led them to what was going to be stretching for them. But he said, guys, the pastor keeps saying it's not about money, it's about a spiritual journey. And he said, for the first time in my life, I feel like maybe God is moving in a different way. Like maybe I had been limiting him. And as I think about that, I realize that's probably closer to me than I realize. I say I believe in God, and I say God is going to move in powerful ways, and that God can do anything. But then when it really gets down to brass tacks, and I'm in those moments of praying, it's almost as if there's a subtext behind my prayers, right? God, do something amazing, but if you could just keep it down just a little bit, like I don't want to rock the boat too much. God, if you could do something, just show up in a powerful way, but keep it down to where I can kind of understand things a bit. And what I'm realizing in my life, and maybe you're experiencing this in your prayers too, is that it's time to unlimit God. And so that's our key thought for this morning. And I want you to know, if you're writing it in your impact guide, it's going to work. But if you try to type that into your phone, it's going to try and change this word, because this isn't a real word. So that helps us, right? But it should be, right? We have unlimited. We've got unlimiting. Why can't we just unlimit? Let's unlimit God and what he wants to do in our lives. Maybe you've been to a zoo. This is my best example for this. You go to a zoo, like the Denver Zoo, and what is the one animal most people want to see? Aside from the meerkats, because they're cute. It's the lion, right? You go to the lion cage and you see that thing behind the glass, and there's almost this instinctive feeling like, I am so glad that there is glass and bars and cage and electrical fences and all of those sorts of things, because if that thing got loose, imagine what would happen if it was unlimited. It's not been hunting in the wild for a long time, and it misses chasing wildebeests, and I probably look like a wildebeest as I'm running down the road. That's limiting, right? So one of my favorite books, The Chronicles of Narnia, I started reading to my son not long ago. Maybe you've seen the movies, or you've heard that Netflix is going to be producing a new version of it. But in that series, you see this world that these kids enter into where there's talking animals. And all of the animals are talking about the king. And the king is this lion, right? And so they go on, they're talking about it. And then there's this famous moment where one of the little girls asks, is that lion safe? Is he safe? And one of the beavers, again, talking beaver in this story, responds, safe? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. And I think in my spiritual journey, and maybe this is yours too, one of the things that I've got to come to terms with or realize is that God shouldn't be safe, but he's always good. He's the king, I tell you. And so what would it look like in our lives if we stopped putting limitations on God? If we unlimited him? And as we've kind of been walking through this series, we've been going step by step through one of the most interesting moments in our Jewish past, our heritage, our faith heritage of the Israelite nation standing in the moment where they were going to enter the promised land. And I just want to tell you, I want to be like Caleb in that moment. So turn in your Bibles to Numbers chapter 14. Numbers chapter 14. You can also find on page 48 of your impact guide space to take notes and some devotional material. But let me get us caught up to speed while you're going through that. Because over the past few weeks, we've been walking step by step through this important moment where the Israelites are shown this promised land that they have been expecting for years and years and years through the Exodus, through this wandering in the desert, and they finally come face to face with the promised land. And they send 12 scouts out into the land for 40 days to go and examine it and to see what's going on. And they bring back this report. And I think Moses, the leader, was expecting that this report would be great. It would be, it's a land flowing with milk and honey. And they kind of get to that point, but then they skip right past it. And like last week, we saw them say, this is a land that will devour us. And so we start today picking back up on verse 5. It says, then Moses and Aaron fell face down in front of the whole Israelite assembly, the community there. And Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh. If you don't know how to pronounce that, I didn't either. I hit play on my Bible app and it reads it to me. And every time it says Caleb, son of Jephunneh, I'm like, that is funny. So it works. So Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who scouted out the land, tore their clothes. So Moses and Aaron fall face down. Caleb and Joshua tear their clothes. Both are a visceral reaction. They're a sign of what's going on in their lives. Moses and Aaron fall down to worship and to grieve, but Caleb and Joshua tear their clothes, something they would have done in mourning. So then Caleb speaks up to the community and he says this. He says, the land that we passed through and explored is an extremely good land. If the Lord is pleased with us, he'll bring us into this land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and he will give it to us. And remember, a couple weeks ago, we talked about this is a promise God had given them. This isn't something that's in question. And so he says then, don't rebel against the Lord, and don't be afraid of the people in that land, for we will devour them. Notice the intentional language that's used there. These 10 faithless scouts spread this rumor, spread this bad report and say, this land will devour us. But Caleb unlimits God and says, no, we will devour. We will not be devoured. Their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us. So don't be afraid. That's a rousing speech, right? It's like those moments in the famous movies, where William Wallace stands and he rallies the troops and gets everybody excited. And then they go and they see victory, right? Except for in this case, the response is the whole community threatened to stone them. You see this faithless response rising up. And I think a part of it is just the fact that while Caleb believed in an unlimited God, the people of Israel, they limited him. I think it's time for us to look at what Caleb did and unlimit God in our own midst. Because you see, as I look through Scripture, I've had this one person in the Bible, that Bible figure that I've kind of almost envied, if I can say that. Like, God, I want to be that guy. And it's usually King David. Because David gets this amazing thing said about him. It says that he is a man after God's own heart. I'm like, I want that. What do you want on your tombstone? I want somebody to say, this guy followed God. But as I look through Scripture and as I look in this moment, I almost think that I'm starting to resonate more and more with wanting to be more like Caleb. Because Caleb had something else said about him that maybe was even greater than what was said about David. For Caleb, it says, I wholly followed the Lord. Or some versions say wholeheartedly followed God. And it's one thing to talk about yourself, right? And say, oh, I follow God in every way possible. But then God actually speaks up in Numbers. It says Caleb had a different spirit. He followed me fully. And we can't even say that about King David. He didn't follow God fully. He had many mistakes in his life. But Caleb, out of all of the biblical characters, shows up as this unlikely hero. See, he wasn't even naturally born as an Israelite. He had to be adopted into the tribe of Judah. So he wasn't one who maybe had all of the right breeding, the right pedigree, the right, family history. Instead, he's an unnatural citizen. And then on top of that, he's chosen to go and scout this land, and he sees the same giants that all of the other guys saw. But yet he looked at the giants, and instead of seeing himself through the eyes of those giants, he looked at the giants through God's eyes. And he said, no, we can do this. But the most important thing I see in that even is that moment where he unlimits God. And he says, if God is for us, who can be against us? I believe in this big God. And so as we look at Caleb's story, especially as we get into next week, you'll see that even, fast forwarding into his story, when he's 85 years old, he has the opportunity to stand before these giants again. And even at 85, he says, God is not done with me. God is not smaller somehow because I've gotten older. And he says, give me this mountain. He stares down the land. He says, God, it is time for him to be unlimited. But what does it look like to unlimit God in our lives? I was thinking about that word, unlimited, and it naturally made me think of cell phone companies, right? That's the most unlimited thing we have in our lives. They give you unlimited access, and you're going, hooray, thank you. You have bequeathed unto me such a great thing. Now let me give you money, right? But if you were alive when these were the cell phones in your pockets, then you might remember a time before the great harvest of unlimited. There was these things called minutes. And if you went over your minutes, the landlord of your cell phone came calling and said, you now owe me lots and lots of money, for you have betrayed your minutes, right? And so you almost lived in fear like the Israelites. See, it's all going to tie back together. You almost lived in fear because if you made a phone call and it was long distance, well, boy, they were going to charge you for that. That was a separate brand of betrayal. But if you talked to people around, even your family, and you went beyond your monthly allotment of minutes, well, then you got slapped with this big honking bill at like millions of dollars per second over. How dare you use the telephone? And it's weird how we remember things in our lives. Like what moment in my life would even make me remember this? And yet, I remember when I found out about unlimited. Like all good stories, I was standing in line at Taco Bell, and some of my friends were there, and they were having a conversation like you and I would have face to face, but they're on their cell phone talking to each other face to face. And of course, me, being the fearful Israelite, I'm like, guys, do you not know that you're serving the master of minutes and you are wasting your minutes talking? And they said, friend, let me show you the light. We have this new thing called unlimited on our plan. And as long as we're talking specifically to people who are on the same plan as us, we don't get charged minutes. And so you know what they did? It was the greatest thing ever. They decided that they would start a phone call and just never hang up. Their goal was 1 month. I don't know how far they made it, but at this point they were 3 days into the same phone call, and they would just plug their phone in at night, set it down, go to sleep, wake up, hey dude, you there? Okay, cool, sweet, stick the phone in their pocket and just keep going. I remember looking at them with wide eyes in that moment and just going, how do you live like that? How do you live that dangerously that you are willing to battle the God of minutes? But then they rolled it out to the rest of us. And I remember there was this magical day where I got a new cell phone carrier, and my wife, who was then my girlfriend, and I got on the same plan, which meant we had unlimited minutes. And suddenly I felt this freedom inside of me, like I could talk to this woman forever, and there's nothing they could do about it. And so at the time, I was living in Kentucky working on my master's, and she was in Oklahoma City. And so we didn't quite do the whole nonstop phone conversation. But at the end of the night, we would call each other and, say our little sweet nothings. I won't share what we said, stuff like that. And then we'd stick it on speakerphone, which was also this new revolutionary technology in phones not that long ago. And we would plug our phone in and lay it down and just go to sleep. It was like, wow, I am living bold in my life right now. What if we treated God more like the unlimited plan than we did that master or carrier who had limitations and minutes and restrictions and overages, and you have to broker your house if you accidentally talk for 10 minutes too long? What if we realized that all of this was something that God created, which means he is so much bigger than all of this. And yet, like we've been talking about over the last few weeks, instead, we kind of stare at the giants, the obstacles, the fears, the worries, the doubts, the questions. And as we stare at those things, they get bigger and bigger and bigger until we have to be reminded by someone who's like a Caleb that the unlimited plan exists. And that if we would just unlimit God, that some amazing things could happen that would blow your mind far beyond standing in line at Taco Bell and watching two people talk on their cell phones. Because nowadays you're like, what is that? I could call Mexico and just let the phone go and nobody would care. But you remember those restrictions and those limitations. I want to unlimit God in my life. Turn back to the next section here in Numbers 14. And we're actually going to skip down to verse 20. Not because that section in between is difficult to deal with, but let me just share with you, as you're in your devotion time this week, as you talk in your small group, that this in-between section is a little bit difficult. Because the Israelites have made their decision. They are not going into the promised land, and God says, you know what? I'm done with them. Moses, why don't I just start over with you? And Moses has this conversation with God where he's like, whoa, hold on. We just had this thing called the Exodus. I don't think anybody had named it that yet, but Moses is an innovator, so he's naming things. He's like, we just had this Exodus, and people are going to remember this, and the nations around us are watching, and if these people are destroyed, then they'll think that you can't bring us in. And so that's where we pick up in verse 20. The Lord responds to Moses. He says, okay, I've pardoned these people as you've requested. Yet as surely as I live, and look at this unlimiting language, and as the whole earth is filled with the Lord's glory, none of the men who have seen my glory and the signs I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, in other words, the past and their present situation, and have tested me these 10 times and did not obey me, none of them will ever see the land I swore to give to their fathers. Go back one slide for just a moment. I just want to give you a quick Bible study tip as you're looking at this. Notice the specificity of how God says they've tested him 10 times. That's not just to say they went over their minutes or anything like that. That's to say that they betrayed God, they doubted him, they walked away from him 10 times. And anytime you see that specific number show up in your Bible, it's usually tied to a time of testing. Notice there are 10 spies or scouts who give a bad report. They've betrayed him 10 times. The tithe being 10%, it's always tied to a testing of God. Because remember, on the other side of obedience is where we find this promised land. Okay, go back to the next slide again. And so he says here, but since my servant Caleb had a different spirit. That's important. He had a different spirit. These other guys are afraid. They're chaining me up. They don't believe. But Caleb has done something different. And he's remained loyal to me. I will bring him into the land where he is gone. And just as importantly, because we're going to talk about this next week, and his descendants will inherit it. His descendants will inherit it. You see, there's another reason why I believe it's time for us to unlimit God. Because the reality is we often think about the opportunities ahead of us and say, oh, it just will cost too much. It's going to take too much of our time. It's going to take too much of our energy. It's going to take too much of our resources. And we start to limit God and bring him back into a size that our little brains can hold. Or worse, something we can get our hands around and try to control. But the reality is there's always an opportunity cost as well. When God brings us these great opportunities, it's for a reason and a purpose. There's something bigger that's going on. And if you look at what happens with Israel, you see the opportunity cost. They say, oh, well, if we go into this land, we might get hurt. We might not make it. We might struggle. But what they weren't taking into account was that if they didn't go, they wouldn't see the blessing, the promise. They wouldn't see this amazing land that God had for them, that even they recognized flows with milk and honey. And for our lives, it's a lot of the same. God calls us to step up into a new season. God calls us to go and reach out to somebody. You know, sometimes you feel like you hear God saying something, and other times you just feel like, oh, I wonder what would happen if. But then immediately you get this other voice from yourself that's like, oh, if I did that, I would be the weirdo. It's okay to be weird sometimes. If I did that, others might look down on me. Caleb had a whole nation talking against him. If I did this, I might not fit in. Again, Caleb had to stand against his entire nation that were going to stone him and say, no, this is what God has for us. But look at what they lost. They ended up wandering the desert for 40 years, faithless, hopeless, knowing that they would never see God's promise. And so, if you've been here, you know these cards that are on the little booklets, the impact guide there. These represent the name of somebody that you are praying for. Somebody that's going to have a transformational encounter with Jesus. Somebody that maybe even represents your long shot. That's the opportunity cost. What if we change things at the church? What if we start doing things new? What if I personally, not meaning me, but you, in your own spiritual life, if I personally have to step out and do things in a new way, or God tells me to do things bigger than I've ever done them before, or I'm called to sacrifice more of my time or my finances or my resources, what if God actually has to be Lord of my calendar and my sex life and the conversations I have and my career? What if God actually gets unlimited in my life? I want you to know it can look kind of scary. But on the other side of it, the opportunity cost are those 298,749 lives that are within a 5-mile radius of this building that have no relationship with Jesus or the hope that can only be found in Him. That is the cost. The tagline for this series and for this whole campaign has been, imagine a city transformed by hope. Imagine that person that you never believed in a million years would ever develop a relationship with Jesus, would ever, get rid of their addictions, would ever commit to their family, would ever decide to do something other than just live for themselves. Imagine that person that you are praying for had a radical and transformational encounter with Jesus and discovered the hope and the love and the joy that's found in Him. That is our opportunity cost. That's what's on the other side of deciding to step boldly into the uncharted. Because if you'll remember, the Israelites, while they had an awareness of this land, it was uncharted to them. That's why they sent the scouts to come back with a report, right? Because it's uncharted. And our futures, if we're going to follow God and if we're going to unlimit Him in our lives, we're going to take us into some uncharted places. Some places where we say, we've never done it that way before. Some places where we say, wow, what if God actually did this? And so as we've been walking through this campaign, we have some resources for you. One of them that you'll see is this little blue booklet. It's our commitment guide, and it has some frequently asked questions. I'm going to send these out in email, but you also have them out in the lobby area there at our Uncharted table. If you have not already grabbed one, I want you to get serious, you and your family, and sit down and go through this week as we prepare for Commitment Sunday. But I want to share with you just a couple quick things that you'll find in this that help us to weigh that opportunity cost versus what does sacrificial giving look like. And so in there, you'll see 5 D's of sacrificial generosity. The first one is do away with something. Like maybe you have a streaming account that you could do away with for 2 years, or maybe there's something along those lines. The second is delay something. For my wife and I, we've talked about how this first year of the campaign, we've already got some vacation time planned, and believe me, we need it. But next year, we're going to delay some vacations so that way we can set that aside and bring our all in to the table. Third is to do more of something. Maybe to pick up some overtime or to do something like that and give that towards the future of the church. Fourth is to donate something. You know, maybe, for example, you have an appreciated asset and you can liquidate that yourself, or you can just donate it directly to the church and not have to deal with the tax penalties and the sides of it. And then fifth, you can deny something. And again, example for us is my wife and I get $50 each a month from our budget that doesn't go to kids, doesn't go to groceries. That's the only amount of money that we can control and say, hey, if I want a new game for my Switch, or if I want to, go do this and have some fun, that's what I use. I can deny that for those 2 years to help to make this thing happen in a bigger way. And then you'll also see in your impact guide this gift profile chart. I've showed it to you before. It's on page 17 of the impact guide, but I just want to go through it real quick again as a reminder. You see, this has that phrase, not equal gifts, but equal sacrifice. This is what it would look like for us to do $1.4 million over the next 2 years to renovate the building, to bring in some new ministry, to fully fund the budget, to completely renovate what we are doing to have a transformational impact in this city. And you're probably going to start by looking down here, and that's okay. But this week, I want you to pray to God, what would it look like if we were unlimiting you? What would it look like if we, believed that you could step up in a bigger way and maybe raise our eyes up to see a transformational future that you have? Because look, as I've said, it's not just about this church. It's about the ministry that God is doing in and through this people and what he's doing in your hearts and through your hearts. But collectively, we are that church. And if you look back over the last year of what we've been able to accomplish with next to nothing, it's pretty incredible if I do say so. God has shown up in some big ways. And then he's showing up right now, the sidewalk outside that's going to be renovated that wasn't this week, but City of Denver, blah, 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 it gets messy. We'll get there. We'll get the cross hung up. We'll get some new stage elements, some new energy. And I want to announce really quickly 2 other exciting things that are going to be happening in the next couple weeks. First of all, as we began this campaign, we started out with the premise of we need to add some staff to be able to do some new things. And specifically in our kids ministry area, we've grown at such a rapid rate in our kids ministry area, it's time to start looking to hire someone to go into that role, because our volunteers, while they give a lot of time to it, just can't keep up with the ministry growth that's happening there. And then, as you know, a few weeks ago, we had a staffing change that kind of suddenly came upon us. And so we started asking ourselves, what would it look like if we kind of combine some things for now? And so I want to let you know that in May, about the middle of May, a gentleman by the name of Jake Brashler is going to be joining our staff. Jake is working with kids ministry right now where he's at. They're going to be moving to Denver so that he can come get his master's degree at the seminary. And he's going to be working as our next generation's pastor. But it just so happens, I know his family, and every single person in his family is also a worship leader. And so I said, hey, we're working kind of on an interim basis right now. Do you happen to be a worship leader as well? And he is. So he will also be coming in to work as our worship leader. But as I've said before, the goal is to expand the staff. And so that's a temporary move till we can get some additional momentum going. We also have a new counseling ministry that's going to be starting. Perhaps you remember when Ellen was here for 15 years working as a counselor here out of our building. And over the last several months, we've been kind of looking to see if there wouldn't be another person who could fit into that role. Not as a staff member on our church, but as a partnership that we would work together with. And so starting in just a couple weeks, and she should be here next week to introduce herself, Julie Holborn is now going to have an office here in the church. And so if you need counseling services or know someone who does, she'll be working at her own practice, but as a part of that agreement, she will also have a sliding scale for those here who need it. And if you just happen to be looking at her and going, wait a second, this girl looks a little bit familiar, let me tell you why that is. You see, Holborn is Julie's married name. Her given name was Julie Garrett. And about 25 years ago, she was just like my little kids, running around as the pastor's daughter in this church, going up to her dad's office and joking around and having fun. And now she's going to have an office of her own, continuing that legacy even as we continue to move forward. And so there's some exciting things. I also want you to know that next week we have our Commitment Sunday. And so if you're a guest with us here and you're going, what is all this about? You can catch up online, but just know, come back, be a part of this, but we are challenging our church to step up and to see a new generation, a new ministry, a new beginning for the next chapter of our story. And I want to invite you to be here because we'll also have someone from the Emerge team who gave us the grant money that's been able to renovate parts of our building, doing some filming. So invite your friends. We're giving away the t-shirts still. We're going to have free barbecue. We're going to have a lot of stuff going on. But I want you to be praying this week about what that commitment would look like for you. And I want to close with another quick story I think was great that our campaign manager shared. He said there was one of these commitment gatherings that they were doing just like we did a couple weeks ago. And there was a young family there who just kind of came up to him and said, hey, I don't know why we are here. That's always a good place to start, right? I don't know why I'm here. Because it was being hosted at the house of a owner for an NFL team. And this NFL team owner opened up the conversation by saying, guys, I am giving $10 million to the future of our church, and I want you to step up too. And if you're a young family who makes $50,000 a year and you hear somebody say that, you're like, That's my interpretation. That's artist's rendering right there. But they came to Rob and they said, hey, we can't do something like that. What would giving look like for us? And he said, well, here's the deal. Why don't you just pray that God would be unlimited in your life? And if God shows up in a powerful way, you would just commit that towards the campaign. And so they said, okay, no problem. A couple weeks later, they get a call from Mexico, where their family of origin was. They said, do you remember this family member? Nope, not a clue. Why? Oh, well, he happened to leave you something in his will, and he passed recently. And they said, oh, cool. What did he leave us? He said, he left you a gold mine. And they went, excuse me? You said a gold ring, right? A gold watch? A gold nugget? No, he left you a gold mine. And so they came to the pastor of the church, and they said, hey, we prayed that God would unlimit himself and show up. And by the way, we're now the biggest givers in the church. Here's a gold mine. That's kind of a crazy story, right? For God to do something like that. But the reality is God wants to do, maybe not in the financial sense, although it could be, but God wants to do that in your life. You've been praying prayers that God would show up. But you also have been holding back and saying, but don't show up too much because that might scare me. What would it look like if you prayed honest prayers and said, God, would you be unlimited in my life? And so as we always do, as we close, I want to remind you of our next step, which is to pray this week over that commitment card. But we also open up a time at the altars for anybody who wants to come up during the worship music. We have these response stations here where you can take self-guided communion. You just take a little piece off the bread, dip it in the cup, and then you have a moment of reflection and prayer. And you can also drop your cards and other things in the giving boxes there. But as we do that, and as we step into a moment of closing worship, would you pray a dangerous prayer with me? Lord Jesus, God, we're tired of seeing things be safe. We're tired of praying for big things. and then expecting that you're barely going to show up. God, what would it look like if we just started to see things through your eyes? If we started to see the giants and the doubts and the cancers and the fears and the divorce and the broken families and the worry, instead of seeing that ourselves through those eyes, what if we just realized that you are unlimited and great and huge and powerful? Jesus, would you remind us in this moment that you want to step out and do abundantly above and beyond all that we ask or imagine? Jesus, would you be unlimited in our lives? And in any place where we are praying that prayer, but even just secretly in the depths of our heart, limiting you and saying, please be safe about it. God, would you help us remember that you are never safe, but always good. Jesus, as we come before you in worship through song, worship through responding in communion and prayer and laying ourselves down at your altars, God, would you just remind us that you are so much bigger than we're letting you be in our lives right now? It is in your holy and powerful name we pray, Jesus. Amen. Would you respond as you feel led?